On the 8th of January 2023, violent gangs stormed the Brazilian capital in an attempted coup against the country's new president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Organised by allies of his defeated opponent, Jair Bolsonaro, the rioters stormed the National Congress, the Federal Supreme Court, and the Planalto Palace in Brasília, seeking to restore the far-right leader to power. The scene felt oddly familiar. Exactly 2 years earlier, on January 6, right-wing insurrectionists stormed the US Capitol in an attempted coup encouraged by another defeated president, Donald Trump. But the similarities between these twin insurrections are not a coincidence. In fact, they are evidence of a Reactionary International in action. But what is this Reactionary International, and how does it work? And why has it been so successful in advancing the agenda of the far right across the world? To answer those questions, most people look to the famous faces of the far right. Narendra Modi bulldozes mosques. Javier Milei takes a chainsaw to the Argentinian state. Giorgia Meloni's minister proudly displays a photo of Benito Mussolini. But these leaders are not acting alone. For years, a global network has been in formation, bringing together judges and journalists, foundations and financiers, academics and entrepreneurs with the explicit aim to propel the far right both within and beyond the boundaries of electoral politics. So let's break down the tricks of their trade. In search of a way to crack down on growing domestic opposition, Hungary's authoritarian government purchased the Israeli spyware Pegasus in 2017. Once installed on a victim's device, Pegasus can not only access all data, but covertly activate the user's camera or microphone. Pegasus's parent company, the NSO Group, requires the consent of the Israeli state to sell its software to foreign countries. This presented no problem for Viktor Orban, who has retained a close relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu since they first met 20 years ago. Leveraging this connection, the Hungarian state quickly obtained the spyware in time to deploy it ahead of the 2018 parliamentary elections. At least 300 residents have reportedly been targeted by Pegasus since then. But Hungary is not alone. The NSO Group has sold its spyware to military and intelligence agencies across the globe, including the FBI. As early as 2016, Emirati human rights defender Ahmed Mansour was targeted by Pegasus, likely by the UAE government. The journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was later murdered in the basement of the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, was also targeted. Far from a rogue operator, the NSO Group works hand in glove with the Israeli state. Its founder, Shalev Julio, serves as a senior member of the IDF and recruited heavily from the elite IDF intelligence units to build his operation. With our defense ministry sitting at the controls of how these systems move around, we will be able to exploit them and reap diplomatic profits, proclaimed one former military aide to Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel is now the world's largest exporter of spyware, and compared to their competitors, the NSO Group is practically transparent. Team Jorge, for example, is a clandestine team of primarily Israeli contractors connected through underground channels who have manipulated over 30 national-level elections. Led by Tal Hanan, Jorge, the existence of Team Jorge was only uncovered in 2023 after they were found to have provided opposition research to Cambridge Analytica, the British company which infamously used the personal data of nearly 87 million Facebook users to influence voters through social media misinformation. Team Jorge hacked the cell phones of prominent opposition leaders during the 2015 Nigerian presidential election. They are suspected to have disrupted the 2014 Catalan independence referendum and disseminated false information about former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez in 2012. Team Jorge's network extends deep into the global security establishment. Former Deputy US Secretary of State Roger Noriega, for example, once listed Tal Hanan among his associates on the website of his lobbying firm. But technology is only the tip of the iceberg. The Reactionary International depends on a well-financed group of organizations whose policies, proposals, and plans offer an ideological foundation for the global far right. The Atlas Network forms a key part of that ideological architecture.
Each year, the Atlas Economic Research Foundation provides resources to intellectual entrepreneurs in the United States and around the world.
Intellectual entrepreneurs.
Intellectual entrepreneurs.
Without available alternatives to the oppressive ideologies found around the world.
What alternatives might people choose?
That's why at Atlas we connect our foundation of supporters through a network of individuals and think tanks.
Founded in the US in 1981 to advance the ideals of thinkers like Ayn Rand, the network counts more than 500 think tanks among its membership, all advocating for neoliberal deregulation.
Atlas was really set up to encourage the formation of free market classical liberal think tanks around the world.
Since its establishment, Atlas has received millions of dollars in funding from the Koch brothers, who have spent $145 million directly financing groups that have attacked climate science, the ExxonMobil Foundation and the Sarah Scaife Foundation, which has a long history of funding climate denial. In return, Atlas Network members have fought against indigenous rights, targeted climate activists, and allied with big oil. Policy Exchange, a former UK partner of the Atlas Network, released a report in 2019 called Extremist Rebellion, describing Extinction Rebellion as an extremist organisation seeking the breakdown of liberal democracy and the rule of law. But these organisations are not always non-governmental. On the contrary, one of the key financiers of the Reactionary International is the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, of the United States. Proposed by President Ronald Reagan, approved by the National Security Decision Directive 77, and funded to the tune of $315 million from the US government. Back in the 1970s, the Central Intelligence Agency was coming under increasing fire as its crimes, assassinations, and covert operations were exposed to the world. So Washington devised new methods to promote its interests abroad, starting with the National Endowment for Democracy. Through the 1980s, NED began to sponsor regime change around the world, beginning with financial support for anti-Sandinista Contras in Nicaragua and Honduras. Today, the NED continues to undermine national sovereignty and has funded 54 organizations seeking to undermine the Cuban government since 2017. The NED and the Atlas Network allow the Reactionary International to hide in plain sight, disguised by platitudes like spreading democracy and promoting individual freedom. But far from upstart outsiders rebelling against the institutions of the status quo, the Reactionary International finds common cause with the traditional establishment. But this army of reactionary agents does not work for free. To build, sustain, and deploy this infrastructure, the Reactionary International requires a heavy flow of financing, some of it clean, but much of it dirty. To do that, the Reactionary International relies on a system of international financial regulation intentionally plagued by loopholes, if you're wealthy enough to exploit them. In 2016, the Panama Papers investigation leaked over 140 politicians, including Argentina's then conservative president, Georgia's billionaire former prime minister, and then Abu Dhabi emir, to corporations based in 21 different tax havens. 5 years later, the Pandora Papers revealed a further 35 world leaders and more than 100 billionaires who had established offshore trusts in tax havens like the British Virgin Islands and the Seychelles. Jair Bolsonaro's finance minister, for example, was shown to have $9.55 million hidden in offshore accounts in the British Virgin Islands. Aleman, Cordero, Galindo & Lee, the Panamanian law firm from which the Pandora leak came, whose former clients include the Trump Organization and Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet, was identified as a go-to offshore provider for top politicians and elites in Latin America and beyond by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. These investigations reveal a complex financial network that allows the Reactionary International to breathe life into political projects that seek to undermine democracy all around the world. Operating in the shadows, exploiting the loopholes, and breaking the law, the International's criminal funders have escaped all accountability. But we do not have to sit back as the Reactionary International gains momentum. Progressive forces around the world can and must push back against its growing influence. We can start by enforcing the law. From hacking phones to hiding millions, the right wing's criminal activity relies on governments treating them with impunity. It's time to crack down on the Reactionary International. But we also have to get to the roots of social problems and address the material concerns that drive many into the arms of the Reactionary International. For too long, the politics of the extreme centre have fanned the flames of the ascendant far right, breeding only apathy among working class communities whose living standards have slumped. These have long been exactly the conditions in which reactionary forces can command social consensus. Only with a bold vision dedicated to uniting humanity behind a common agenda to liberate the oppressed, raise the standard of living, and oppose the war machine can we defeat the Reactionary International once and for all.